So way back in 2015, Rob, Brian, and I tried to get to Loch Levin Lake in the snow, and we did not make it. So we're trying again. Well, we found camp for the night. We're at the first lake, which is just Loch Levin Lake, as opposed to like middle or high. This trip is going to be kind of a trip video mixed with some tips and tricks. So I want to kind of walk you through best practice to set up a tent in the snow and some other helpful hints. The first thing I want to talk about is calories. In the winter months, especially, it's really important. You want to eat more calories than you would on a similar hike, similar mileage in the warmer weather, because not only are you trying to fuel your body just for the exertion of hiking, but you also need those calories to keep you warm, especially once you've stopped and you're setting up camp and all that good stuff. So first things first, it's time for lunch. Well, we've got some good calories in us, and it's time to set up camp. There are kind of two different ways you can go about setting up your tent in the snow. And it kind of just depends on how much protection you need from wind and other elements. We're up on this kind of beautiful ridge, great view of the frozen lake, and we're not really expecting any real weather or wind or anything. So I'm going to opt for the easier of the two setups, the less labor intensive. And essentially what I'm going to do is put my snowshoes back on and stamp out a nice flat compacted area to pitch my tent. So once you've tamped that tent pad down nice and flat, the next thing you're going to do obviously is lay out your tent. Normally on a trip like this, I would bring a freestanding tent, which is much easier to set up. But because this is just one night and I've got Kiki with me, so I'm carrying her gear and my gear, and I didn't want my backpack to be super heavy, I brought my X-Mid. So I'm going to be setting up a trekking pole tent in the snow, and it works fine. There's just a couple of little tips and tricks that will make your life much, much easier. First off, you just want to lay the tent out the same way you would if you were just laying it out on dirt, just on any other trip. You do want to be a little more careful about where your corners are, because it's harder to move the stakes once you've got them in place. Next thing you want to do is dig a little pit, similar in size and shape to a cat hole. And then we're going to take our stake and put it through the loop of the corner guy line, just like you normally would. But instead of driving it in like a nail, you're going to lay it down flat, bury it in the snow, and then tamp the snow down on top of it so it doesn't come popping back out on you when you put some tension on the rain fly. Once you've got all four corners staked out and the tent's nice and taut, and you know that you're going to have a pretty good pitch, you're going to take your trekking pole and you want to put its snow basket down and handle up. And the reason for that is that the snow basket will actually keep the pole from sinking into the snow, and you can keep a nice, tight pitch all through the night. So the last thing you want to do is go around to each of your guy lines and just adjust the tension as you go and make sure you have a nice taut pitch. I try to keep my rain fly as close to the ground as I can get it so that I don't have a bunch of snow drifting in throughout the night. My X-Mid has the mosquito net liner, not the solid body liner, so I will get some snow blowing in the middle of the night, and I can mitigate a lot of that by just keeping the rain fly pretty close to the ground, but not so tight that I don't have any ventilation, and then I'm dealing with condensation all night. So the second method to set your tent up in the snow is a little bit more involved. And essentially what you're going to do is build yourself a wind block. You're going to dig a pit, use that snow that comes out of the pit to build a little wall around your tent and keep the wind from blowing in. This is a technique I would use if I were camping at a higher elevation or if I were someplace where I didn't have a lot of natural wind block. You're still going to want to tamp that tent pad down with your snowshoes, and you're still going to want to utilize that dead man anchor, especially if you're expecting high winds. This does take a little bit more just physical exertion, but in the long run, it's absolutely worth it to have a good night's sleep. So now I've got the shelter all set up, I'm going to show you my sleep system. And what I brought with me on this trip is my Sea to Summit Etherlite XT, which is an insulated pad, but it's only insulated, it's like a 3.2 R value. So it's not perfect for a winter trip, but I'm a very warm sleeper, so it definitely works for me. There are pads out there you can get that, have an R value up to 6. If you're a cold sleeper, I'd recommend something like that, but the 3.2 does me perfect. On top of my sleeping pad, I've got my 20-degree quilt, which is strapped to the pad just like you normally would any other quilt. And then I've stuffed my 30-degree quilt inside the 20-degree quilt. And I also brought this little thermal bag liner, just in case it gets a little bit colder. I may or may not use that depending on what the temperatures get down to tonight. And believe it or not, the 2 quilts that I'm carrying weigh less and take up less space in my pack than my 0-degree bag, and in theory should keep me warmer than that 0-degree bag. This is the first time I've tested out this system, so I'll check in with you in the morning and let you know how my night was. So we're sitting up on this dry slab of granite trying to enjoy the last few minutes of precious sunlight. And that is one of the harder parts about winter backpacking is the sun sets very, very early and comes up a little bit late. So you've got, 12, sometimes 13 hours in your shelter, and you need to find ways to kind of entertain yourself unless you are like my buddy Brian here, who can just sleep for 12 hours. I cannot do that. So I always bring a Kindle or something to read. And my typical routine is I'll sleep 3 or 4 hours, wake up, read a couple chapters until I start to drift off again, and just repeat that cycle until the sun comes up. But we could not have asked for better weather on this trip. This is gorgeous. That's beautiful. Weird little pervert hound.
Good morning. Pretty cold last night, definitely down into the 20s. My two quilt system kept me nice and warm. It's not perfect. I think there's some room for improvement, but I definitely was comfortable all night. Time to get some breakfast and hike out of here.
Well, we're all packed up and ready to head out. It's kind of a short trip, sort of shaking the dust off, seeing how our winter gear works. Everything worked pretty good. A couple of changes I would make. I think I am going to go ahead and spring for a sleeping pad with a higher R value. And I don't think I'm going to carry my trekking pole tent again. I really like my X-Mid, but in these conditions, freestanding tent is definitely the better option. So next trip, a little heavier packed, but probably a little more comfortable soon.
As first winter trips of the season go, this one was pretty epic. I so very rarely get to spend time on the trail with Rob, so it's such a wonderful experience to be able to get out there and have these conversations with him and just hang out and catch up. I love spending time on the trail with Brian. Any chance I get to do that, I'm going to jump at it. And overall, although this trip was short, it was very, very much needed. And sometimes you just need a night under the stars to recharge that battery. And this trip absolutely did that for me.